Now is the time, a time you'll look back on, a time you adopt as inspiration. You will recollect this time, this moment, right now. Motivate yourself towards success. Overcome, take over. The time is now.
Good evening, everyone, and we are back. We've gone the full week. I think we've done a full 5-dayer, full of Newcastle United content, and we are back again for even more. We are back to talk all things Newcastle United. In the build-up, we are just under 24 hours away from the big game on Saturday. Nottingham Forest come to town. First game of the season. If you haven't watched the away days, make sure you catch the away days. A fantastic show with Mr. Dorr, where we talked about all things Nottingham Forest and Newcastle. Great chat. Really, really was a good chat. If you haven't watched it, go back onto the Loaded Mag NUFC YouTube channel and check it out. But tonight we've got a very much a special planned, and of course I've got the main man Chris Hall next to me. How you doing, Chris?
Good, mate. Yeah, more good. Just looking forward to tomorrow, obviously, and where I'll be seeing you as well, Pete. So very, very excited for that, as well as Daz and Rich. So it'll be the first time the four of us are all together. Shame Martin couldn't be there, but I'm sure there will be other occasions. But yeah, really looking forward to the match tomorrow. And obviously the Premier League season kicks off in just under an hour. So looking forward to watching Palace and Arsenal as well.
Definitely. So all kicking off at this moment in time. And look, to talk all things Newcastle, and to give us a little bit of a roundup of the week and what maybe is to come as the football begins. We've got him back on. He's come and joined us at Loaded Mag NUFC again. Welcome in, because he's waiting. Ben Jacobs. How you doing, Ben?
Hi, Ben.
I'm good. Great to see you both. How are you?
You too, mate.
Not too bad, not too bad. It's great to have, two Leicester-based, but just three Newcastle fans just talking Newcastle business. This is what we are here for. But
I mean, at this rate, you won't have the option to be a Leicester fan because we're short on finances, we're short on players, and Newcastle want Maddison, Chelsea want Fofana. I'm worried heading into the season for pretty much the first time since the Great Escape season.
Definitely. Look, before we get into the players, I think it's getting to the point now, listening to Brendan Rodgers' press conference earlier, it's going to get to the point now where they're going to be calling up me or you to play because we're local to help the team out this season. Surely it's getting to that stage.
It's possible. It's worrying for Leicester. I think the only saving grace is that I think Fulham and Bournemouth are going to be quite weak this season. I've been quite impressed by Nottingham Forest, and as a Leicester fan, it tells you they must have done something right in this window for me to be saying that. I think Leeds and Everton will struggle as well. And Leicester have just always had a knack, and that's why hanging on to Maddison is important, of bailing themselves out. They had a strong finish to the season. So really, last season was only disappointing because we had so many injuries in defence that there was a reliance on Vardy and Iheanacho and even Perez if he came off the bench, and Maddison and Tielemans weighing in because we weren't going to keep that many clean sheets. And then with Pereira, again, injured, he's ruptured his ACL, he's out for 6 months, his World Cup chances are over as a consequence. It again becomes down to, do they have the firepower? Because I still don't see them keeping that many clean sheets, especially not now Kasper Schmeichel has gone to Nice. So then you're looking at that team and you're saying, well, if Tielemans is sold, and if they were forced to get rid of either Maddison, I think unlikely, or Fofana still challenging but possible, then how do they stop themselves from sliding down the Premier League pecking order, and how far Might they slide? And that's the worry, because Leicester fans are notoriously pessimistic. Winning the Premier League doesn't really make you suddenly reassured that you've got a top half team, because the Premier League's so interchangeable and money talks. And at the moment, Leicester don't have any depth and they don't have any money. And that's why there's a very real fear that we could find ourselves 15th in the Premier League table or worse come May.
Definitely, it's I'm shocked at the situation with Leicester. They've always been that team that, even aside from West Ham, we've had a couple of years that have always been the team most likely to break the sort of the top six, and in particular the top four. And they've had a couple of stabs at it, and unfortunately at the last hurdle have just missed out. But it is a really, really strange situation. Obviously, it's clear that they need to. It's clear that they need to sell before they buy. I think you mentioned even Rodgers is alluded to the fact. Now, what's interesting tonight is that I think you've just reported on it within the last hour that I think there's been another bid for Wesley Fofana from Chelsea. Am I right in thinking? I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that and what it might mean possibly for any sort of Maddison deal for Newcastle United.
I think Maddison's becoming quite separate, because as I understand it, Leicester is strongly trying to get him to sign a new deal. So obviously when bids come in, it's leverage for the player. And Newcastle have got a big challenge. They haven't, as I understand it, since their second bid was rejected, come back to the table, not with anything formal anyway. So let's wait and see. There's a long period of the window still remaining, but it's normal, I think, that just before the season starts, a club like Leicester are not going to play ball. So even if they were prepared to sell Maddison/Fofana, they're going to wait a little bit, partly so they can look at replacements and partially because they want to start their season and get off to the best possible start. And the reality is that only Leicester know where their finances sit. I've pushed sources on this and they've not revealed in any detail whether it's a squad clearing, a wage clearing, or an urgent necessity under financial fair play. I think the latter is actually less likely than is being reported, only because let's not forget you can still offset some of your losses under financial fair play. So if Leicester were to spend, they're still not in the same dire state as Everton, and Everton haven't been punished because they've been able to offset more losses under COVID. So I think that Leicester are waiting, in all honesty, for a Tielemans fee. They're trying to move in the market as economically as they can. They need to probably find a goalkeeper, even though there's still two at the football club. People are asking me, by the way, with fantasy football, which goalkeeper they should be picking. I think it's Danny Ward, but I don't want to commit myself to that yet because you just never know. And Schmeichel going is a big blow to the football club, even at his age. But with Leicester's position, they'll wait a little bit. Chelsea are pushing on Fofana, though. There's no denying it. And the little secret about the window that fans never get is when a bid is rejected, it is very often denied by both the buyer and the seller, which sometimes complicates the narrative a little bit. So my understanding is that bid number one was dismissed instantly out of hand and was around 61 to 62 million, something in that ballpark. It was over 60 million, but not by much, is officially what I was told. And then if there was an early bid number two that was rejected, it was done so quickly and discreetly. And then later today, Friday at the time of recording, another bid, either the second bid or some may argue a third bid. It all just depends what you classify a bid, because sometimes it's verbal, sometimes it's written. But the later bid on Friday is, as I understand it, over 70 million. And it remains to be seen whether Leicester have just dismissed that instantly and out of hand, or they're going to consider that. I think a rejection is highly likely, and Leicester are going to be holding out for a minimum of 80 million. And they've said that consistently all along, whilst at the same time, and I know this sounds paradoxical to certain fans listening, whilst at the same time saying not for sale. But there's a long period of the window to go. And if Leicester urgently need the money, they're going to keep saying not for sale to get the highest possible price. And it's a test of Chelsea's resolve. And then if Chelsea finally hit that 8-0 number or more, then it becomes a test of Leicester's resolve. And welcome to the transfer window. This is how negotiations work. So I think that everyone wants black and white. There's never black and white. It's part of the gamesmanship of the window. Leicester are always going to say not for sale. They're always going to stick to 80 to 85 million, because if they don't, then Chelsea are going to go, great, here's 65 to 70 million. Thanks very much. And Chelsea are never going to come in with 85 million to begin with, because they want to see whether 80 or 75 or 70 with preferential sort of structure is enough to get the deal over the line. And that's another really important point. It's not just what you bid, it's how you bid it, i.e., do you take 85 million as a total if 65 million of it is guaranteed in a 4-payment plan and 20 million of it is in speculative add-ons based upon who knows what. And when you deal with a bigger club, by the way, another very little known fact in the window, you've actually got more creativity over how you demand the add-ons, because the bigger club will try their luck. They'll say, well, you can have 85 million, but only if Wesley Fofana plays 10 Champions League games and we win the thing, or only if he plays 35 or more Premier League games, and so on. And you can be even more creative than that as the big club, because you can say, we could do a treble and we'll give you a little bit more. Or you could say, I don't think this is actually strictly legal, but you could try your luck with if he gets selected for the World Cup and he plays or starts more than a few games, because there's clearly a link between Chelsea and the World Cup. That's just me being hypothetical with the last one, because I've never asked a source, actually. I'm going to go back and do it after this podcast. If you can actually do that, because it's out of your control, because Chelsea have absolutely no control over the French national team. But you can be more creative because you've got more assets to deal with. And are Leicester going to accept that offer over 70 million, where you say, we'll give you 65 of it up front and we'll give you 5 million of it if he plays more than 50 games for the football club? So it's not just about what you bid, it's about how you pitch it, which is why Barcelona's offers have been so frustrating to a lot of the selling clubs this window, because they've tried to hit a number equivalent to a suitor using this creative process of staggered payments and more speculative add-ons. So we'll see how Leicester reacts. But I think the point is that, coming back to Newcastle have cooled on Maddison in terms of the negotiations, not the desire to have him, but the negotiations, because they've not been led to believe they can get him, and that they are 15 to 20 million apart in minimum valuation. Whereas Chelsea have been told Fofana's not for sale as well, but they're going up and up and up with every bid, and they are classifying him as a top target at this point. And because they need a centre-back, let's not forget Cucurella is a left-back. He can play on the left side as a centre-back, but realistically, it's about the fact that Ben Chilwell's coming back from an injury and he's versatile, whereas Fofana is a slot in. Now, he might not be a straight slot in, and that's something Fofana has to consider, because Koulibaly and Silva are there. But in a back three, he's probably a slot in. And obviously, if Tuchel explores a back four, there's that versatility. And as he rotates, Fofana is going to play a ton of games this season and clearly beyond. So there's a clear plan for Fofana. And I think that the player, as a result, really wants the move. So Chelsea, I would say, in really simple terms, are pushing more actively and aggressively. And Newcastle are in a slightly more resigned state, despite the fact that they really, really like Maddison, particularly Eddie Howe.
Interesting. Chris, did you have a question that links into what Ben's just been talking about?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, Ben, I know. Like, you've mentioned a few Leicester players there, and obviously, you touched a bit on Cucurella and players like that. But I wanted to ask you, because you've probably been asked this loads of times, and I don't know whether you've got a definitive answer for it. But in terms of, obviously, Youri Tielemans has been linked with a move away now for a little while. And then you've got James Maddison, who's recently been linked with Newcastle. You've got Harvey Barnes, who's also been linked with Newcastle, and then you've got Wesley Fofana, who looks like he could be on his way to Chelsea if the money's right. What I wanted to ask you was, if someone said to you now, Ben, you're going to have to lose one of those players, like which player would you prefer to let go, like taking all things into account? And similarly, do you think that it will just be the one player? Do you think, like, for example, do you think rather than selling, say, two that could be worth a combined, say, 90 million, would it be more preferable to lose Fofana, knowing that you can then keep the other three? Like, how do you see that panning out by the end of the window?
Well, I think Leicester don't want to lose either. And then from a purely personal point of view, if I had to lose one, I would pick Fofana, solely because Maddison was Leicester's player of the season and he's a source of goals and assists at a point when there's no guarantees on Vardy. Iheanacho's streaky, and Perez actually got 2 really good finishes that will hopefully boost his confidence against Southampton on the final day. But again, not a natural source of goals. So Maddison for me is the glue that holds Leicester together. Fofana, I would be gutted to lose, because if you flash forwards a few seasons, you've got an elite level centre back, and some would say that he's getting close already. And if he didn't have that injury, his development would be even further, and so would his consistency. But I think the difference is that even at 60 million for Maddison, you've got to replace him with a creative minded player. And if you look who's out there at 50 or 60 million, then it's difficult, because you either spend that all on one player, and you're probably for that value going to have to find the target and be under heavy competition. It's a Rafinha style fee. So I think of a sort of Jack Harrison at Leeds as a possibility, and he's priced around 35 to 40 million, but they don't want to sell him. So what you might end up getting if you sell Maddison is somebody that isn't Maddison and doesn't give you those goals, because that type of player is harder to find, either because they're just not out there, or they don't want to come to Leicester City, or there's just heavy competition to get them. And you've only got your 60 million in a best case scenario, and it might even be less with Maddison to use. Whereas Fofana feels like it's going to be so above the market value. So when PSG value Fofana as a backup to Skriniar, they're saying 50 to 55. So if you get 85, then you're not only so far above market value, it's a Harry Maguire style fee, but to get a defender, especially under Leicester's model, because it's all about finding these hidden gems at low value, 10, 15, 20 million, and then backing them to become players that you can either turn into elite defenders or sell for 60 to 80 million. And Leicester have got a proven track record of that with a number of different players, Riyad Mahrez and N'Golo Kante, now Wesley Fofana as well. They find the gem, they use the gem, they turn them into an elite level player, then they either keep them, or when they sell them, they make a massive profit. So if you task a recruitment team with replacing Fofana, I think they would do that in a very unknown, savvy, young sense, and bring in someone probably only for 20 million that would have the fan base going, oh no, and then in a year's time going, oh yes, because that's how Leicester do it. And I just think centre-backs are easier to find and replace when you've got 85 odd million in the bank than a James Maddison. So that's why I lose Fofana than Maddison. But Leicester's position is clear, and it's going to be tested in the next 25 days or so. They don't want to lose either.
I was going to say, because it's interesting that you say that about, obviously, you know, you'd prefer to lose Fofana because there's a chance to replace him. Now Fofana was a supreme talent that obviously Brendan Rodgers and Leicester unearthed and brought through from Saint Etienne, and he's been a fantastic buy. You know, I don't see Leicester personally. You might think differently, Ben. I don't see Leicester personally going out and doing that again, going out and plucking someone at that age, of that level and that quality. And that's where I think that even if that's Leicester's mindset, that Fofana is the easiest to replace, I'm not quite sure. You look at Leicester last season, and Fofana and Evans are clearly the best partnership at Leicester, and that's absolutely fine. But Evans couldn't stay fit. They didn't trust Vestergaard. You know, Amati was playing there, and he's not comfortable in that position. It was all very much mismatch. So if you take Fofana out, which is the constant and the best, in my opinion, the best centre-back there, Evans being the most experienced, but in terms of the best, in terms of quality, Fofana gives you something different. I think that's really, really difficult to replace. Whereas if you go to Maddison, you talked about other players chipping in. You know, we talked about Barnes, Iniacho, Vardy. Hopefully we'll have an injury-free season if he stays, that is, because he's also been linked with moves elsewhere. Yeah. And you've got goals from other places in the team, which is why, I don't know, in my mind, and maybe it's my Newcastle head on here, and Chris, you may agree with me. In my mind, I'm thinking, actually, although he was player of the season, maybe the fact that Maddison was player of the season is an opportunity for you to cash in for him now, in terms of benefiting that, and he's proven his worth. He is a good creator and a great creator move him on. You can get someone in possibly to replace him, and maybe another striker. You got Patson Daka as well that will chip in with some goals. I don't understand if Fofana leaves. I don't understand Leicester's train of thought with that, because I think, with Schmeichel leaving, who was a fantastic goalkeeper for you, and then arguably your best centre-back leaving, I think that could leave Leicester in a real difficult position. But and look, that's just my opinion. But going back to Maddison, you've talked about Brendan Rodgers saying not for sale, not for sale, not for sale. Can Brendan Rodgers really go into a new season without making any signings whatsoever, which is what is alluded to in his press conference today? He said at this moment in time, there is no signings that are coming in, which says he's going to stick with what he's got. But knowing Brendan Rodgers in his history, he loves to sign players. Is that really realistic for Leicester and Brendan Rodgers, in your opinion?
Well, Leicester needs signings. It's as simple as that. And it's chicken and egg, isn't it? Because you've either got to sell, and you have to. Then when the money comes in, you will have freedom in the market. Or alternatively, you don't sell and you stick with what you've got. So if Rodgers' stance is Fofana and Maddison are not for sale, then at that point, he has no money to spend effectively. And that is his tact. But obviously, if he says we've got to sell big before we can buy, and then I want to buy, then he's kind of contradicting himself, because he's just told you that all of his big assets are not for sale. So where's he going to get the transfer fee from? So there's an element of gamesmanship, I think. Rodgers desperately doesn't want to let Fofana and Maddison go. And I think that now Leicester would probably be quite relieved if an offer finally comes in for Yuri Tielemans, because it would just give them that 30 million, of which maybe you can spend half or so on at least somebody. So Leicester are not going to sign many, but they still probably would like to explore a goalkeeper, even though, as I say, they've got two at the football club that can both contend for the number one spot. I think that Danny Ward is the more likely to start there, because the plan at the end of the season originally was to try and give him some game time, and then Leicester kind of U-turned on that position. Then I think that a loan will be a very strong possibility. And I think that if Leicester are that stuck in the market, if they sell one of their big assets, they might be open to some kind of cash plus. So with Fana, that's another option, that if Chelsea get a roadblock and have to go up to that 85 million, they might be more like 65, 70 million and try and chuck in a player, because we know that Todd Bowley loves a swap deal. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But Leicester will sign somebody. They'll have to. And Rodgers has to be kind of careful now with how he words things, because as I said before, if it's no signings, the implication is that he'll have to hang on to his assets. But if Leicester need to sell their assets, then Rodgers will use some of that money to make signings. And he can't simultaneously say he's going to sign and he's going to hang on to all of his star assets if financially that's not possible. So he's very blunt and careful with his wordings at this point. But let's see whether he says the same thing later in the window. And by the way, what's really interesting about that is that the journalist will always get told off for reporting one thing accurate at the time and then telling you later that the situation has changed. But I guarantee you that there's not one Leicester City fan or football fan that will call their manager a fraud if they say one thing at the time and then you turn on it. So let's put that on record, that Brendan Rodgers says not for sale. He said the same with Ben Chilwell. If Fofana is sold, then Rodgers will be incorrect or will be playing games. But nobody's going to say that Brendan Rodgers is lying. And this is unfortunately the reality of the window, that as journalists, we're talking to sources. Some of those sources, by the way, are managers. Some of those sources are players. Some of those sources are executives. Some of those sources are agents. And that's normal, because who else can you really go to? Those are the four big ones, if you like. And if each of them has a position that they believe to be correct at the time, and then you go to four of them, so you've gone to all sides, and then you believe that there is enough due diligence done to report on a story. If 2 weeks later the situation changes, then guess what? That is the transfer window. It's not reliable. And as I say, unfortunately, as journalists, when we give you the blow by blow, we believe that we're accurate because we've done that due diligence. So when I come on here now and tell you that Maddison and Newcastle has not progressed any further from the last bid, that is accurate at this point. If in 2 weeks' time Newcastle decide to bid 100 million and get the player, I'm not inaccurate in telling you that now the transfer window has moved on. But it is kind of interesting how we as messengers, as journalists, if you like, will always get told because it's there on Twitter. In a week's time, in 2 weeks' time, if something's moved and we report on it again, that we somehow misled you. But nobody is writing to Brendan Rodgers and saying, you're lying. And this is just the reality of the transfer window. So it's quite difficult to read a manager. And I find this part of the transfer window quite intriguing because it's the first time that we as journalists have had the opportunity to directly ask a manager. When the window opens, they're not back. And then when they fly off, they want privacy. And now they've got their obligation of the match day -1 or match day -2 press conference. So we can ask them direct and they're forced to give an answer. So then they're on record with a position. Yeah. And that position is really interesting. And I was out in New York only last week with Joe Laporta, who says one thing, does another, talks to a club one way, talks to the media another way. So
he's been doing that for years.
To report,
he really has.
Says it saying hypothetically now, because we'll never reveal our sources in public as journalists. That's not what the trade does. But if I went to Eddie Howe hypothetically off record and asked him something and reported it, by not naming the source, if it changes, you get hammered. But what we like, I think, as journalists is that now I can go to Eddie Howe on record because it's part of a official press conference he has to do. So then nobody disputes it. If it's right or wrong, if it's black and white, if it's complicated, if he gives a long answer, if he gives a short answer, it doesn't matter. I can give that as a one-sided opinion because it's an on-record obligation. Whereas so people understand as a journalist, when I have sources and they're not on record, I have an obligation to go to multiple sources because there's no ability to cover your back because he's not put his name to it. Whereas when it's a press conference or an exclusive interview like my one with Laporta, I can be face-to-face. And it doesn't matter whether Chelsea dispute that. I can report it instantly and with faith because his face and his name and a camera is on him. And that's what I love about this point of the window, that you can put something directly to someone and they can't hide from it. And that's where we see, is the manager media trained? Is he flustered? Does he say one thing but smile? Does he say one thing but fold his arms like this? And the body language tells you that it's fun and games. And this is what I love about the whole situation. And Brighton found that firsthand with the Cucurella deal, where they were cornered and then they had to make a statement and then they had to backtrack and then they did a press conference. And you just see the reality of just how crazy the transfer window is. And I love it, to be honest.
It's great. And you know what? It's really interesting you said that about the Cucurella thing, because we had it similar with Bruno Guimaraes in January, where the deal was agreed as such. Leon came out with a statement to say there was no deal agreed and that it wasn't going to happen. And then literally 24, 48 hours later, the fee was agreed and the deal was done. And it's all because certain clubs have to work in certain ways. I think with Leon, they had to tell their shareholders, which is why they had to announce it to them first rather than put it out there to the media. But the media got out there first, and it's all mad, but it's all the beauty of transfer windows. And look, this is us very much new for us, because we've never been involved in so many transfers or so many links, certainly to top quality players, for a long time. So this is all new and very, very exciting for us. But look, it's one of them that we will keep an eye on. Clearly, Leicester are a team that a lot of clubs are keeping an eye on, because there is a feel that they need to sell, and on top of that, there is teams like Newcastle, like Chelsea, that are looking out there to try and exploit. We've talked about Yuri Tielemans. There's a feel that, I think there's a mood, I think, in the camp that he feels like he has to go because he's not going to sign a new deal. So that one could potentially move on and carry on from that point as well. But I just want to change tack slightly, because you talked about press conferences. And obviously, Eddie Howe had his press conference today in the build-up to the Newcastle United game, and he was talking about, obviously, the new season, and what he obviously wants from his team and what he kind of demands and how much he's looking forward to his press conference. And then it moved slightly, and we got the announcement from the club that Eddie Howe had then in fact signed a new deal, a new contract with the club. It doesn't say how long it's specified, but it says a new long-term contract. Eddie Howe is said on there, it's a great feeling to commit my future to this incredible club. I'm extremely proud to be the head coach of Newcastle United. I've enjoyed every moment here. I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge my coaching team, players, staff, and supporters. They make it a very special place to be. And he even did a little private message for all the Newcastle United fans. You know, from your perspective, Ben, is this a good move? There's been lots of different talk and lots of different opinions about why this deal was announced today. In your opinion, is this a good move that Eddie Howe signed a new deal? I'm excited about it. Chris, I want to get your opinion in a second about the new deal. But what do you think, Ben, about this?
I think it's brilliant. I think they've announced it now because it's the dawn of a new season, and it's a reiteration that they're committed to their manager. And why not? Because he came in difficult circumstances, transitional period, ambitious owners. But as Chelsea are finding as well, that state of flux, even if it's all positive, can be unsettling on the football side. He got them out of trouble. He finished the season from January in European form. No reason not to reward that whatsoever. Obviously, long term, hopefully, isn't Alan Pardew long term, because you never know what's going to happen. But I think that it is a commitment once again by this football club that Eddie Howe is the right man. And I think the other thing I would say, by the way, and it's logical, is that you have to think of this as a reward, but also a reality. And by reality, I mean that when Eddie Howe joined the football club, a lot was up in the air. So they couldn't give him any kind of insane contract or long contract to the point where it's almost indefinite Pardew style. But I'm in no way saying it's like a decade-long contract or anything like that, by the way. But it was a state of flux. If Howe had taken Newcastle down, if it didn't work out, they could have easily changed him. Going into the Championship would have had a big impact. And usually with a manager, you don't say, if we go down, there's like a 25% pay cut or anything like that. So I think at the end of keeping them up, it's normal that they can offer Howe improved terms because he's done his part, he's done his job. Whereas I think that when he first joined, you can't give him 5, 6, 7, 8 years. You can't give him some insane wage despite your finances because you don't know where the football club are at. And that, I think, is why they've gone back and renegotiated. I think it will have been mutual. I think Howe is aware that he deserves more. And I think that Newcastle want to start the season by giving him more to say that this is a patient football club with stability. And that's really important, the long term, because if Newcastle end up in 10th this season and don't go far in a cup, there'll be a certain portion of the fan base that think, have we moved? Are we on track? And I think that's the football club saying back that as long as we continue, we stabilize, we still need a few more windows to be 6th or 4th or better. And that, again, is that commitment to Howe. So for me, it's not about what he's paid. It's not about the specific length of the contract. It's about the football club starting a season saying that we believe we've got the right manager for our long-term strategy. And this season is just a building block to that strategy, as opposed to saying, if we finish 10th, if we finish 12th, do we need to U-turn? Do we need to panic? Do we need to be cutthroat? And all signs are that everything Newcastle's ownership group are doing at the moment is patient, is sensible, is prudent. It's for the long term. And locking Howe in is just one part of that for me. And it's a very well-deserved contract, and it's a very good strategy.
Chris, I want to get your opinion on this because obviously, it wasn't expected today. It was it was very much blindsided. They haven't specified the deal in terms of how long the contract is, and there's a lot of people that are kind of speculating that, that it could be, just a 1 or 2 year extension on it. It could be 3, 4, 5 years extension on it. Some people are saying they've given him the contract to stop him from taking the England job after the World Cup, potentially. What are your thoughts on that in terms of the length of the deal, but also obviously the Howe deal in general, a new contract? Is it a good thing for you?
Do you know what? It is a good thing. I'm not going to say it's a bad thing, but I must admit I was quite taken aback by it. I thought the timing of it was unusual. I take Ben's point. I think there's probably 3 or 4 ways of looking at it. Like originally when I first saw it, I was like, oh, okay. I was expecting, like a player announcement or something like that. So that threw me a little bit.
Yeah.
Then when I thought about it, I thought, you know what, we're securing Howe's future. There's a potential, that Southgate doesn't do very well at the World Cup. England could come in for Howe. Maybe they're trying to secure Howe. I also looked at it from his perspective where, the owners are saying, listen, great job last season. Let's start the new season. You're the main man. We're putting our faith in you. So I seen it like that. And then I also looked at it and thought, well, is this potentially a risk in terms of, as Ben said then, is it a massive deal? Is it an incentive based deal where we go, right, okay, we're going to give you this, we're going to give you a little pay rise because you deserve it. There's going to be lots of incentives in there. You could be getting Europe, all things for Eddie Howe to kind of, spur him on, if you like. But on the other hand, I was thinking, well, what if he makes a bad start to the season? What if? What if, because our expectations are incredibly high now. So as a fan base and as a club, so I'm thinking, I'm playing devil's advocate here, but let's say we have a struggle in the starts of the season. Let's say we finish the season 13th. Is everyone then going to be looking around and going, what are we doing? Are we keeping him? Are we looking for someone else? So I found the timing of it quite unusual. But then on the other hand, I suppose, my sensible side takes over. And I think, do you know what? If he was only on a 2-3 year deal, it makes sense to kind of extend that and give him that security. I completely get it. But then, playing devil's advocate and looking at it from a different point of view, I was a bit like, would it have been nice to maybe get to January? Maybe, if we were top 6, top 7, top 8, and then go, there's your contract, go from there. I just thought it was quite unusual timing, but maybe some would say it's perfect time, and I don't know. And as Ben said there, which I don't disagree with, to give him a new contract on the eve of a new season, maybe it's very, very clever and very, very clever thing to do. I don't know, but like I say, you could look at it 3, 4, 5, 6 different ways. But it was interesting, put it that way. But not that I'm opposed to it. I think he deserves it. I want to see the future with Eddie Howe. As long as he progresses in the way that he's done so far at the club, I've got no qualms with Eddie Howe being here the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years. As long as we continue to, go up that table, that's fine by me.
Yeah, I think I think it's a very sensible move to make this deal announced 24 hours before the first fixture of the season. It's really going to create a feel-good factor at St James's Park. You're going to hear Eddie Howe's chant, streamed out from the Newcastle United fans in the build-up to the game. It's going to give an extra 10% to the fan base. Not that we already needed it in the first game of the season, but we're certainly going to get that from everybody. And obviously myself and you, Chris, are going to be in attendance tomorrow. So we're going to be right up for it and right behind the players. And it does give that extra bounce going into a brand new season. So it is a really, really smart move from my opinion. Look, I wasn't going to come to this.
What do you reckon of that, by the way, Pete? Just that comment from David Koo is an interesting point.
It's an interesting one, and there has been some speculations that the likes of Alan St Maximin could potentially sign a new contract this summer. Not a lot of people thought that might be the case, but there's been a lot of talk. Well, I say a lot of talk, but some little snippets that either the likes of Alan St Maximin or one of the other kind of long-serving players at the club may sort of extend the deal. Could be the likes of Callum Wilson, maybe someone like that. So it could well be that a player then comes and announces that they're going to stay at the club. Alan St Maximin's the one that makes sense because he's the one that is very much talked about at the moment. So that could be something that could follow on the back of maybe a good performance at the weekend, and it again creates another good feel-good factor for him and the fans in the build-up for the next game. But we'll see. I want to come to this because obviously, thinking about time, and I think there's a few questions for Ben before we let him go. I just want to come to this because I wasn't going to bring it up because it wasn't really a talking point, but lots of people in the chat are talking about potential of Lucas Paqueta tonight. I think Sean Casey's been on the case tonight on social media and saying it could be a done deal. We don't know whether that could be the case. Look, I think we hope it is the case and that he is a kind of player that we bring in. But just on your opinion, Ben, you know, Lucas Paqueta, have you heard anything with regards to that deal? Has that gone quiet? You know, is that still a likelihood that deal could get done at some point in this window with 3.5, 4 weeks to go?
Well, I think Newcastle's interest in Paqueta is not a massive secret, but my understanding remains that neither Newcastle nor Arsenal have tabled any kind of formal bid, and the kind of situation remains exactly the same. That the Jean-Michel Aulas perspective with Paqueta is that he is a minimum 65 million euros player, and he asked for 80 when Newcastle were interested in January. So Newcastle have then gone to the agent and have made inquiries, that part's true, to find out if the player is keen. And Newcastle fans then put 2 and 2 together because they say he's best mates with Bruno. Of course, he's keen. And it is definitely true the player would like to move to the Premier League. And it is also 100% true that the player is open to a move this window. He thinks that his next challenge should be away from Lyon. So all of that's really good. The downside is that the Lyon politics may make any deal difficult, which is why clubs are going to the agent first. So even though Aulas is saying open to offers, etc., 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 there is a American majority owner incoming to Lyon called John Textor, who currently isn't in, but will be soon, and he will eventually have all the control. At the moment, there's not much he can do other than presumably relay opinions to Aulas, who effectively is running the club. And he said that Lyon are going to rival PSG, and he doesn't want to sell Paqueta. So that is another factor. Textor would like this to drag on, the window to shut, clubs to be fobbed off, bids to be turned down, and then he'll deal with it when he's formally in. Aulas is pushing a sale because he knows the player wants to leave and trying to cash in. There's been loads of interest, but Newcastle United and Arsenal have not, as I understand it, tabled any kind of formal offer yet. But of course, it's understandable when you, loosely speaking, miss out. I don't want to be misquoted here because Maddison, you can never say is dead. But if Newcastle haven't returned for Maddison, then they want that type of player. So then what are they going to do? They're going to move on to either their next target or they're going to seriously try somebody else. And that's why Paqueta is one to watch during the window. And the advantage of Paqueta, by the way, is that he's very versatile, even though people might say, could he be a number 10? Can he play in a wider position? Can he move between wide and central? He's actually on record as saying his favoured position would be on the left side of midfield. So there's another option to kind of have him in a sort of somehow Bruno Joelinton Paqueta 3 or further up the field. So you've got 2 options with Paqueta, and that will be intriguing to Eddie Howe. So Newcastle's interest is no secret, but as I understand it, I must admit, haven't made an inquiry on Paqueta in the last 48 hours due to travel. But my understanding at the beginning of the week was that no Premier League club had made any formal offer to Lyon, but Newcastle and Arsenal were in touch with the agent to see what the player's thinking was. And inevitably, the Paqueta narrative for all interesting suitors will move before the window shuts. But just keep at the back of your mind that John Textor element that is being underreported, because regardless of what the buyer wants, regardless of what Aulas wants, regardless of what Paqueta wants, Textor still may find a way to put his foot down between now and when the window shuts.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. I mean, Lucas Paqueta is in the starting lineup tonight for Lyon's first game of the season, so he is playing in that game. So I'm sure there'll be many a Newcastle fan that are watching the game. And no, I'm not offering him a lift. No chance.
You're not taking a detour to Liverpool? No.
I'm not going all the way to Liverpool and then across to Newcastle. That's a 6 hours.
That's a chip and a half, that of the piece. Yeah.
But Paqueta is obviously in the starting lineup tonight, so we'll keep an eye on that and we'll keep things moving from that point of view. I'm sure Newcastle fans will be keeping an eye on things from that perspective. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. I don't know if you've got time for maybe one last question.
Yeah, hit me one last question. I've got a live for those that see me bolt away at 8, so that's why I'm a little bit tight for time.
No, that's absolutely fine. I don't know, Chris, a couple of questions in there.
Yeah, to be fair, I've got quite a few for Ben, but I'm gonna cherry pick them, Ben. Okay, and this one is one that's come in quite recently, and I quite like this one from Life Goals. So I'm gonna ask you, Ben, which is, can you clear something up for me, please? Someone said if Newcastle buy a player for 100 million, for example, PIF pays 80%, PCP pay 10%, and the Rubens pay 10%. But I'm under the impression PIF fund 100% of the deals. I mean, can you clear that up?
Well, I mean, the division of shares versus who pays what are not the same. So if you're an 80% majority owner, it doesn't mean that you pay 80% of the fee. It's Newcastle United Football Club. Their books are their books, their funds are their funds. And it's obviously up to the investors at the football club how much capital they put in. And I don't think that there'll be a rigid format that every time they do anything, they expect the income, should any of the ownership group invest, to have to come from a particular source at a particular ratio. And that's really not how a football club works anyway. Newcastle United are a business. They've got books. The books have been inherited by this ownership group. They choose collectively to invest capital. And if that eventuality happens, whether they're putting money into the football club or they need money for a player somehow, then it's a case-by-case discussion. But I don't think that there is in any way, shape or form a division equivalent to the amount of shares they have based upon how they fund a player. I think that's nonsense, because it's not like when you buy a player as PIF, they keep reaching into a PIF kitty. Otherwise, the Premier League would have issues with that, and there would be an overlap between PIF, who have government members, and they get their funding from the Saudi Sovereign Bank, which is the government bank. Newcastle United have layers of division between PIF. So anything in the football club at the moment is Newcastle United funds. And when they choose to spend on a player, it's based within Newcastle United fans, of which the whole ownership group collectively control. And they're in serious trouble if every single time they need a player, they need to reach into the Rubin brothers' pocket, PCP's pocket, and PIF's pocket. That's simply not how a football club or the funding of a transfer works.
Yeah, no. Thank you very much for clearing that up. Yeah. Sean Mawson asked Ben, will Newcastle start next season with different sponsors for different outfits? So, for example, like the big clubs do with their training kits. So, rather than just have a sponsor, on across all memorabilia or all like merchandise, if you like, can you see them splitting it up so they'll have like a sponsor for training tops, a sponsor for the main shirts? Is that how you think?
I think Man U do that, don't they? They have different sponsors for that.
It's very normal, but it's not a question I've asked directly to a Newcastle source. I've got to be honest. The question I asked was more about, would you bring in what effect and put them somewhere else for visibility until the FunBet deal is expired / resolved, and then at that point move them across. And that is likely, and I think we're seeing this with like Noor and other sponsors, that where they can bring a sponsor in early, even if they're not in the slot the sponsor would like, that's logical. But I don't think they've necessarily got a plan now. The shirts are already out, now the training kits are already out, to keep adding little things here and there. I think that they've got bigger plans than that, of finding new primary sponsors, particularly with links to the Middle East and North Africa and or specifically Saudi region. And then from there, over time, we'll see whether those sponsors end up being front and center of the shirt or back of the shirt, or used in more creative ways to help grow the Vision 2030 brand and generate visibility and tourism in and or around Saudi Arabia. And that's what I really like, by the way, about the strategy, that you would think, because of the politics we've known from the takeover, that they're going to be very Saudi-centric. And they will be, in the sense that Saudi is the biggest market in the Middle East and North African region. Yet, by the same token, they're very aware of capitalizing the World Cup traffic, because World Cup traffic won't just be during the World Cup, it will be after the World Cup traffic. And they're also very aware from business models that the UAE is a huge market, as proven by both Manchester City and Arsenal. So I think if you're talking airline, it will be very Saudi specific. If you're talking Vision 2030, it will be very Saudi specific. But once you move towards oil, which is against the Vision 2030 vision, but if you go further, it will still be a big part. Then once you look at tourism, and also once you look to get those in Newcastle out to the region, you have to be much more westernized. And that's where the region, I think, will be far more than Saudi Arabia. It will be about Middle East and North Africa. And at that point, you're looking at Dubai. So if, for example, you were saying airline, I would say Saudi. If you were looking at tourism, I would say NEOM and Saudi specific things to Vision 2030, but a bit of UAE and Dubai specifically creeping in there. But if you were saying soccer school or soccer schools, that's when I think you're going MENA, because you either want more than one, or you just appreciate that there's an element of westernizing it to some extent. And that's where you might look at UAE. And I think there'll be multiple anyway with their soccer schools. So Saudi, Bahrain, Kuwait, and UAE, if they go down that route, and it is still an if. So don't be surprised if they look at commercial partnerships, and don't be surprised if those commercial partnerships for now are not necessarily stuck on things. It may be more about a partnership with a Saudi team to share best practices. It might be about a partnership around shopping, as we've seen with Noor. Okay, that one is on the shirt, but it's really just about getting Newcastle shirts on a website and getting Saudis to buy them. And then the fact the logo's there is just a kind of box tick, because the television rights in MENA allow Noor that visibility, because let's not forget that in Middle East and North Africa, beIN Sports have the rights. So Noor will be seen in Middle East and North Africa, but I don't think they could care less whether in a UK Premier League game on BT Sports, Noor is seen. I don't think Noor care about that. I think Noor care about being seen in MENA, being spent on in MENA, and having Newcastle shirts and merchandise as a part of that. So it's a slow process, but I don't see Newcastle just slapping anything on a bit of apparel quickly, because think where the club are now and think where they could be. And if you sell quickly now for the sake of it, then if the club's strategy pays off in a year or two's time, whoever's bought that now has got an incredible deal. If you're patient, then if Newcastle reach Europe, if Newcastle get a marquee signing, if everything heads in the right direction, you're going to be cashing in for a much higher amount later down the line.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. Ben, just to check, have you got time for one more, mate, or do you need to shoot? As I want
very quickly, one more.
Right, this could be a very hard one to answer quickly, but if you just give us a very brief answer. So Life Goals asks, and I'd be interested to know this: how come Leicester are in such financial trouble?
Good question.
Yeah, it is a good question. So they're not really in financial trouble. It's a myth that they are struggling under financial fair play per se. The backstory is really down to the fact that, and Newcastle might find this as well, you've had to keep rewarding everyone at the football club, and the squad's got deeper and the wages have got higher. And this is because when you win the Premier League unexpectedly, you pay the players well. And then when those players do well and reach a quarter-final in a Champions League, you got to pay them again. And then they're going to want to stay at the football club because they're on great wages. And then to sign a new player, you've got to match the median, at least, wages being paid. And then when you then don't qualify for the Champions League in back-to-back seasons, you're not like, well, at least we're not paying that bonus, because guess what? Europa League football or Europa Conference League football is above the aim for the season again, because you're Leicester City Football Club. So missing out in back-to-back seasons in the Champions League not only denied the club a massive chunk of money, but they had to up everyone's bonuses, up everyone's wages, because European football was beyond the target or the minimum target. And even finishing in the top half, you can't say, sorry, players, now you've not succeeded. Leicester's aim, in my opinion, I don't have knowledge of this, by the way, I'm only giving you my opinion here, but I bet you anything that if Leicester finished in the top half of the table in 8th place last season, that was caused to pay out bonuses as well, because we're Leicester City Football Club. And you can't do a Manchester United and say to these players, sorry, you didn't reach a Champions League, you didn't reach Champions League quarterfinal, you didn't win the Premier League, so now we need you to take a 25 to 50% pay cut. That's just not, I don't think, fair on the playing squad. So that has built up a very high wage that then with new signings, Leicester have had to match, and they've been backed by their ownership group in the market. I genuinely think they can offset a lot of the COVID losses to balance their books under financial fair play, but I just think they're stuck with a big squad, some deadwood, high wages, and not that much flexibility in the market. And that is the problem. And then when you add financial fair play, they can't simply spend and keep paying these wages. So they've got to get the higher wage earners off the bill. And if they get transfer fees that are big enough, that gives them a bit of breathing space. But I don't think it's just about we're screwed in financial fair play, so we need fees. I think it's equally as important to get the highest earners off the wage bill. And this, again, is why Leicester want to keep their young talent, because Fofana is not a crazy high earner at the football club, but Vardy is, Kasper Schmeichel is, and one or two other players that are older at the football club. And then to keep a Maddison at the football club, they'll obviously have to pay him well. So if he signs a new deal, then that is a good strategy, but someone else is going to have to go to allow Maddison to get an increase. But Leicester have basically just been increase, reward. And how can you not? Because the club have had a fantastic decade or so. And now it's the reality of them not being in Champions League, not being in Europe with some of the same names. And something's got to give, because they've got a large squad, they've got a high wage bill, they've got an incentive-based bonus structure, and it's unfair to pull all that from under the rug, because these players have brought the club to where they are. And that's why they've got to think about a new era and invest in their young talent. Otherwise, they are going to find themselves not being able to sign anyone, paying high wages. And then if you do back-to-back seasons where you can't offset those high wages with the money you get from European football, the club could then be in big trouble.
Definitely. Ben, I think that's a great time to kind of end it, because I know you have to leave. Look, Paul Oxley said, thank you, Ben. Please, someone knows football. Some really positive comments. Andy's put, always love listening to Ben. There's been lots of other comments in the chat as well.
Before I go as well, by the way, good luck to Newcastle for the season, and always enjoy engaging with the fans. So appreciate those comments. I want to, I'm not going to answer this. So once I've said this, feel free to say goodbyes or carry on. But I want to set alight a debate that I'm going to come back to on YouTube and look in the comments, because the big thing I want to know, and I'm going to leave you guys to discuss because I do have to run, is centre-backs. And I've gone through it for my fantasy team and in my best Newcastle 11 in as many ways as I can. And obviously I've done Lascelles is captain. Surely that means he's going to play. Well, Shah barely put a foot wrong. Surely that means he's going to play. Well, Dan Burns, fantastic. Surely that means he's going to play. Well, Sven Botman is a marquee signing. Surely that means he's going to play. So that means that Eddie Howe is going to be groundbreaking and somehow play a 4 centre-back formation, which obviously is just me being tongue-in-cheek. So then you've got the whole, well, 2 of them playing together are left-sided centre-backs, so that's not going to work. So I think Shah plays. I don't think Lascelles plays as captain. And I actually think because he's new, Botman might not start. So in my head, it's going to be a Burn and Shah centre-back pairing. But discuss, and I'm going to go. Yeah. But I honestly can't work it out. It's a great choice to have.
Yeah. I agree.
But I drop the bomb and then you're going to.
I know, yeah, boom.
I know.
A Burn Shah bomb.
You really are.
I think it's Burn and Shah. But imagine if you sign Botman after all that saga and then he doesn't play. And it's Forest as well, so you can be a bit more aggressive with respect to them because you expect to control the game. I think if it was Man City, it would definitely be Burn and Shah, but with it being Forest, who knows? But discuss. And I'm going to go, but I'm going to come back to the comments and see what the consensus is.
Definitely. Just before you go, it'd be great to have you on in the weeks to follow in the build-up. Hopefully, if there's something breaks, for our point of view, with a potential Maddison signing. But it'd be great to have you on. It's always a pleasure, Ben, to have you on Loaded Mag NUFC. Thank you for your time.
Take care,
You
guys.
shoot. And look, I'll be in touch. We'll speak to you soon, mate.
Lovely. Good luck for the new season, lads. All the best.
You too,
Take
Ben.
care.
Take care, mate.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Great to have Ben on.
He's just got banged.
Yeah, he's just gone, you know what? I'm going to leave him with this. And then just left us. But look, Chris, there's loads of people coming in with different
Set the
opinions.
chat off.
What's your thoughts?
Do you know what, mate? It's an interesting one. And to be fair, I know like we've spoke about it earlier in the week and stuff, but now, we're on the eve of the game. It was funny because when he started saying Lascelles, we were both like, nah. But interestingly, it is a really interesting question. And to be fair, I've not had to think about this for fantasy footy because I've just gone Kieran Trippier, and I know Kieran Trippier is going to start tomorrow. So, but in terms of centre backs, yeah, it's difficult because you could argue, Pete, for all four of them. And when I say all four of them, I'm talking about Botman, Bain, Shah, and Lascelles. Because at the moment, of those four, we're all saying, and Pete, I know you're going to agree with this. We're all saying, come on, Botman, surely Botman. But then you've then got the problem with Bain, haven't you? Because Bain hasn't really let us down. When I say, I was going to say he hasn't put a foot wrong, but he has put a couple of feet wrong on occasion. But overall, steady Eddie. And, I think it would be disappointing for him to be dropped. Then you've got Jamal Lascelles, who in pre-season, next to Botman, has looked pretty solid. No complaints really from him as such. I've actually thought he looks pretty solid in the pre-season, in fairness to him. And then you've got Fabian Schär, who's probably my preferred right centre-back. But he hasn't played next to Botman. So somebody in the chat, or a lot of people in the chat, have all been saying Bain and Schär. And part of me's thinking, could it be Bain and Schär?
Not for me.
Because, I don't know though, Pete, because can you put Schär next to Botman when they've hardly played with each other? Like, is that what Eddie Howe's going to do? I mean, we've seen him do Botman and Lascelles predominantly. And I'm thinking, I don't want to see Lascelles start. I'll be honest. That's one I'm pretty, I feel like I'm being harsh on Lascelles there. But for me, I want Botman and Schär, but I do have that element of doubt in there because we haven't seen enough of Botman and Schär. So I'm starting to think, is Eddie Howe going to go, let's stick with Bain and Schär and then eat? Because we've seen what Eddie Howe did with Guimaraes, with Bruno. He slotted him in. And I'm just thinking, I know Forest is an easy game, and Ben mentioned that as well. When I say easy game, it's one of our more easier games. We're at home, newly promoted side.
We're expected to win, aren't we?
We're expected to win, yeah. I think that's fair to say. But I don't know. Go on, Pete. Tell me, put my mind at ease, because my head is frazzled with that. And I think it's a great point from Ben.
I'll be honest, my head will be frazzled if Sven Botman isn't starting tomorrow. You cannot go on a 6-month saga and fight with AC Milan to prize a player like Sven Botman away to then put him on the bench first game of the season. It just does not. It doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. He is the future, and you know what? If we'd have signed him and he'd looked a little bit iffy during pre-season, maybe I would have understood it.
I take that.
But he's been class, and he's been for me. He's been the best centre back in pre-season.
I agree with you.
So for me, and you got to look at Eddie Howe's comments today. He's ready to play. He's ready to play football.
Right. Okay. Me, I haven't seen that. To be fair,
it's a no-brainer. He has to play, and for me, in Botman's first game, what does he do? I think there was a this is what I was about to say. Michael, thank you, Michael. You're a legend.
Yeah.
So glad you came and joined us on the show tonight. That is it. Is that they in that first game they played together and they looked every bit what a centre back partnership should be.
Do you think that's Eddie outgoing sounds were good? Do you think? Yeah. And then he's thought, right, let's test the others. Do you think that's what it is?
I said it. I think it was on one of the shows before I went on holiday. I said, it doesn't matter about partnerships. And I even said it to Jordan Cronin after we finished one of our shows. I think it must have been before the holiday. And he mentioned about what he thought it might be. And I said to Jordan at the time, Sven Botman can play with anybody. Doesn't matter who he's partnered with over pre-season. He's almost partnered with Jamal Lascelles to raise Jamal Lascelles. I think I might have said it to Richie actually after one of our shows. In that actually Jamal Lascelles against Atletico Bilbao looked. I think it was Bilbao that he played together with him. I could be wrong, but when they played together, he looked good. Benfica, they played together. They looked. Lascelles looked good in those games.
Botman makes him look good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Botman playing with Lascelles is not because they're a partnership. It's almost because what he's doing, he's trying to build Lascelles' confidence so that when he's called upon, he's ready.
Yeah.
Sven Botman can play with anybody. You put him with Dan Burn. You put him with Shaw. You put him with Lascelles. He'll play the same way because he's a quality centre back. You cannot not play him. So he'll be the first name I look for.
I can't wait to be with you tomorrow afternoon, and if the news breaks, and
we'll be together. We'll be together at 2:00, and we'll be at the phones looking at that lineup. You'll see my face.
Do you see this happening, Pete? Do you see this happening? Life goals?
Wouldn't surprise me, but I'll be honest with you. I don't think Burns had a great pre-season. I think he played well against Atalanta.
I think he was solid, Pete. I don't think he was outstanding, but I think he was. Would you say he was on par with Lascelles in terms of there was no big errors?
No. He was better than Lascelles during pre-season, but he wasn't at the level that I would have expected him to be, considering he's fighting for his place. Botman just oozed class. I think Shaw looked good. Shaw looked really good. He looks fit. He looks ready to go. And like I say, they're both ball playing centre backs. Eddie Howe is looking to be a ball retention team this season, a team that holds on to the ball, not chasing, not having to press constantly. Last season, those boys worked hard off the ball. They had to press and chase and work hard off the ball constantly to try and stop other teams playing. I think this season we're going to see us hold on to the ball a hell of a lot more. And what you need is you need two centre backs that are able to bring the ball out. And we've got that now. And I think for that reason, against Nottingham Forest tomorrow, I expect Nottingham Forest to counter-attack us a number of times, to look dangerous at moments. But what you're going to need in those moments is to stop the flow of Nottingham Forest. If they constantly get attacks, they will eventually break you down. But if you've got a centre-back pairing that can hold the ball and just allow them to control the game and dictate the play and control everything that's going on, it stems the flow of Nottingham Forest. And that's what you need. When you're a club that's good with possession, that's what happens, is that you control the game. And I think that's what we're going to do tomorrow.
I'm just laughing at David. Sorry, David, if I pronounce your surname wrong. I think it's Veach. But David's wrote here, Botman and Shaw, Ben's being a shit stirrer. Do you know what though? It is. It's got the chat really going here, because Life Goals is saying, I know it might be a bit tongue in cheek, but Life Goals is going Burn at left back if he's efforts to get all three in. Target might be a bit miffed. Michael Pomar again is saying he was very much at fault for Benfica's winner. First half of the 1860 game, he was very handsy and pretty poor. It was only when Botman came on that we got control, and he's talking about Burn when he says this.
Yeah, Michael, we are in sync right now. 100%.
Yeah. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. But don't get me wrong, Pete. There's no question in my mind. The two I want to see is I want to see Botman and I want to see Shaw, especially. And I know people say it's not a big deal, and I do get where they're coming from. But if you've got a left-footed centre half and a right-footed centre half, don't care what anyone says. If that's your balance, that's what you want. I know Botman can play right centre back. I know we can do that. But if you've got two ball-playing centre halves who are right-footed, left-footed, and they're comfortable on the ball, that's what you want to see in your central defence. And what better time to throw them both in against a Nottingham Forest side who really, we should be dominating the majority of the possession at the weekends. You ease Botman and Shaw in, and we start comfortably, and tomorrow we go and get a 2-3-0 win, clean sheet. It's a great way to start the season.
Definitely. 100%. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Come and join the Loaded Mag NUFC family. Those thumbs up before you leave. There's been, close to 200 tonight watching live. Obviously, we know the Premier League's back on, so we understand that. But click those thumbs up. Come and join the channel, and those thumbs up allow others to see the show as well. And look, if you haven't already, like and subscribe to the channel as we've talked about. Shy Burns, Simon's been in the chat earlier on tonight. Huge supporter for the channel. Fantastic clothing range, all in support of mental health. So please make sure that you support the channel and support Simon and Shy Burns. We've got pins and prints. Get my words out. Pins and prints. Make sure if you haven't had a look at them, go and have a look. Some fantastic pins and prints going on. We've only got just a small selection of what's available from pins and prints here, and I'm just clicking through them now. Retro NUFC, get involved with Retro NUFC, a fantastic sponsor for the channel. Some fantastic memorabilia and gears that you can get involved in. They're on Twitter. You can see their Twitter handle right there on the screen. Get involved and show support to another Loaded Mag NUFC sponsor, and of course our newest sponsor, Machine House. A lot of their gear is arriving or has been arriving over recent weeks. If you haven't had a look, give it a look. In particular, this hoodie that's on there right now is outstanding. And when all their setup is ready and they're ready to 100% launch all of their gear, we will be purchasing from Loaded Mag NUFC. There's no doubt about that. So get involved in that too. Fantastic. And thank you to all our sponsors. Amazing. It wasn't, we weren't scheduled to do a Friday night show. We got Ben on the show. Massive thanks for Ben for joining us. He loves coming on Loaded Mag NUFC, and he'll be back before the transfer window's out to talk more things Newcastle United, maybe sooner if there is movement in the Maddison deal. But until then, the Premier League's back. It is back. The season's back. Football is back. We will be back on Loaded Mag NUFC to talk all things Newcastle United, both football and transfers. We're going to be at the game tomorrow. If you are, hopefully we'll bump into you and we'll say hello. If not, we will be back to talk all things Newcastle United in our Newcastle Nottingham Forest reaction show, which is there. Until then, Chris, I will see you tomorrow. We'll be in touch. Anyone else in the chat that's going, we'll hope to bump into you and see you there. We'll be darting around the bars and pubs before we get to the stadium. So please feel free to come and say hello. But until then, you guys take care. Have a fantastic evening, and we will see you very, very soon. See you later.
Take care, guys.
Oh.